you so much for joining us. I'm very happy because this is our last masterclass in English of the year. And I'm happy to say that I feel this was a successful 2022 masterclass program because it involved 30 masterclasses, 10 in English, 10 in Spanish, and 10 in Portuguese. And each of them generated a significant space of learning and sharing. Each masterclass this year was very unique in their own way and very special as a space that brings us together. So please let me invite you to start by introducing yourself, writing in the chat box, indicating your name, if you will, and where you are located. I am Miriam Vilela, the Executive Director of the Earth Charter International and our Education Center that is located here in Costa Rica. And I will be your moderator today. This session, this masterclass, is part of our Education Center Masterclass program that is organized under the umbrella of our UNESCO Chair on Education for Sustainable Development with the Earth Charter. We are based here in Costa Rica on the beautiful campus of the University for Peace that is located in the outskirts of San Jose. And as the other masterclasses, this session will last for about 2 hours. The first part will involve a presentation of our main speaker, Rolf, with some Q&A. Then we are going to have a 10-minute break so that you have a chance to exchange your views and insights with other participants. Hope you really engage in that conversation. But and then we come back to a plenary moment where we have more space of Q&A and exchange with Rolf and with one another. So let me briefly introduce you to Rolf. He's a leadership coach and founder of several groundbreaking personal development organizations. In 2005, he made a shift in his life when he left his 25 years work in corporate career, where he had worked for many years throughout Europe with leaders of major corporations and NGOs and their teams, their many teams. This shift involved a 5-year journey after the 2005, together with his family, living and studying with tribal communities around the world, which was documented in this beautiful film, Down to Earth. And I wonder if all of you have seen. If not, we invite you to watch Down to Earth. Actually, you could say in the chat box whether you, or write in the chat box whether you watched the Down to Earth film and what did you feel about it. So, of course, I suppose if you came to the masterclass today is because you are interested in leadership and also in Rolf. And I think this week we had a very particular week in terms of world leadership, not only with the COP27 happening in Egypt, but also with the G20 when it comes to world leaders. So we spend a lot of time envisioning these world leaders, no? What are they doing in the G20 in Indonesia this week? What are they doing in the COP27 that is ending tomorrow? But we can find leadership everywhere in different places and spheres. So I hope we'll get a lot of insights today from Rolf. So Rolf, can I invite you to join in, to come in with your mic? But I would like to start by asking you to share with us a bit of your journey. What really generated this shift in your life between 2005 and 2010? Can you share that with us before we go into the content?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for your lovely intro, Marianne. Yeah, I wasn't working for 25 years already because I thought, oh, then am I that old? But I have been as far as where I am now, the last 25 years on and off. I've been working with leaders in mostly the corporate space, but also with institutions and NGOs to see if we can create healthier cultures and cultures that serve their community and their ecosystem, truly. So in 2005, I had been doing that for about 10 years. And I was confronted with two things in my life. One was professionally, seeing that the higher I started to get into sort of the hierarchy of organizations, the more I was actually starting to get disappointed about the level of leadership that I saw, and sort of the straitjacket in which leaders find themselves, in sort of the way that they made decisions and the way that they were serving their communities. At the other hand, I was also becoming a father of 3 in the beginning of the new millennium. I started to realize that I found it hard to put these children in the educational system, because in the end, I worked for the people that you could say had the best educational backgrounds, had the best educational possibilities and opportunities. I was working for the top 1%. And I started to realize this top 1% is not where I want my kids to end. I saw people that were not in touch with themselves, were not in touch with their environment, were not in touch with the greater picture in life. And so these two things started to really move me and also my wife. And we started to look for, to see if we could break away from society to actually get a real perspective on life. And it was around that time of actually soul searching, and also started realizing, like, what is it that we actually contribute to the world? What is it actually that we contribute to the future of our children? I must say, already back in those days, I was quite concerned about where the world was going, and all those things all of a sudden accumulated into a search for change. And well, I've learned since that when you start putting that out to the universe, then if you pay attention, you get an answer, but usually from a different direction and a different kind of answer they expect. But I was put in touch through a business acquaintance with a clan of Native Americans in Upper Michigan, North America, near the Canadian border. And he said, I've heard you talk about leadership and how you look at the world. He said, you ought to see my friends. And I had no idea what he's talking about. So he started talking that he had met these people in Upper Michigan in the middle of nowhere. And he said, these Native Americans, they have gone back to their heritage, to their roots of their spiritual roots. And he said they're very open-minded. They love to teach people who come to seek. And that was the beginning of our journey. I went there, and shortly after I took the whole family there, and then we made a decision to actually go and live there for some years to really, get back into learning. I have a lifelong yearning to learn and develop myself, and I thought, this is a great investment for me and for my family. So imagine the picture. The upper peninsula of Michigan is it's really backcountry of the United States. It's just woodlands. It's in between the Great Lakes, and there's very, very lowly populated, but it's phenomenal wildlife. And so we basically started from scratch in the middle of nowhere in the woods of Upper Michigan, and it was that combined with these people that we saw us as our teachers.
Well, it's nice to hear this and also envision the beautiful place where you were. But so we would like to hear from you in your presentation, and I would like to start again with this question on leadership. So what was this paradigm shift of leadership, the way in which you saw leadership before this journey, and now what is this wisdom-based leadership that you are talking about? We are looking forward to hearing from you.
Yeah, I know you were going to ask me this question. You asked me to prepare it, so I actually have some slides as well, but I'd like to introduce it a little bit before I turn to the slides that I have prepared for today. in short, what happened is that, as I said, the reason to go there was not a planned action. You talked about a film. The filming was not on our mind at all. We just wanted to actually learn to to embrace life from scratch without the conditionings of our society, which was wonderful because our kids, we homeschooled them, so we had nothing to do with the whole educational system. Our only sort of connections were with the people that we had chosen to hang out with and learn from. And so it was also this connection with nature that was completely different than living in the city. It was a massive shift for us. We lived in the heart of London, the heart of Amsterdam, and all of a sudden we're in the middle of nowhere. And if we wouldn't get in a car in the daytime, we wouldn't meet a living human being. So it was really that experience that we were seeking, to deepening out and to really live life anew. So and definitely not have a plan. That was part of it, to live life without a plan, because that's part of the problem that we have in our lives. I found that is, we keep chasing something and we forget to live in the here and the now.
Or maybe we are too stick to a plan and don't allow.
Very much so, as organizations, professionally, but also just on a personal level. I still think that's one of the biggest differences that I've seen spending my time with indigenous communities and the world that we are also familiar with. So in that unlearning and that unwinding, we started to meet wonderful people, and some of the elders that we started to get in touch with made so much of an imprint on us that we said, well, this is what the world needs to listen to and needs to know about, that this wisdom still exists. And we said, this can't be hidden here in the woods, because the people that were exposed to this wisdom, it's just a few dozen people every year. And so we made a decision to ask these elders if we could start filming them, and that was the beginning of our film adventure. And so ultimately, after a few years in the woods and starting to film with these Native Americans, we decided that there was more people to be found in the world who carry this wisdom and who carry these insights that the world is yearning for. And that became a journey of a year that we traveled around the world and filmed the people that we met and the communities that we lived with. And so that's the story of how this film came to be. But during this whole process, and also coming back after the journey, resettling back in Europe, I realized that I had to do something what I had learned in terms of leadership from the tribal leaders that I've been able to meet. And I started experimenting with what I'm going to share today. How can we apply the wisdom in the leadership that is nurtured in these communities in our own world? And I would like to start with a bold statement that what I learned is that the way that leadership is nurtured, how leaders are chosen, how they are trained, how they are rewarded, how they sort of position in their community, is almost the total opposite of what we do in our Western world. So you can't expect the same outcome when you do something completely different. And that's what I want to talk about today. Okay? Are you guys ready for a couple of slides? I love
yes,
that.
Please go ahead. We look forward.
Let me share my screen. Here we go.
The way in which leadership is picked is completely different in the world of tribal communities than the corporate world.
Absolutely.
I'm just repeating what you just said to help me reflect. Thank you, Rolf.
And so I will give a short background on sort of where we are today. Like you said, we it's a very peculiar week to talk about leadership. what's happening in Egypt, what's happening in Bali. And we can ask ourselves, is this really 27 years of wisdom that we have seen in this movement that is the COP? Is it really sort of the role model leadership we see what's happening in Bali? And without giving an answer to it, I think it's worth to ask that question, because it's very different to in the world that used to be in hundreds and hundreds of years ago, where leaders were leading a community, and that was sort of the sphere of influence. And we have created a global world with global economy, global leaders, where we expect from leaders to run the planet. And so I just don't want to disqualify the people there. I also want to point out that this is a strange concept that we have created. And talking about Egypt, and the amazing pyramids, there's something that we can learn from the shape of a pyramid. And you could say, if we talk in Egypt currently about the climate crisis, to me that's the top of the pyramid. But we have to understand what lies behind it. And I'm not liking to say here that I need to express to you what lies behind the climate crisis, because I'm not pretending to be the specialist here. But I have a certain view on sort of the layers that are underneath this climate crisis. And this is what people are looking at, who study the science, and seeing that there is a whole interactive spiral of fundamentals, ecological fundamentals, that are off balance. But there's other levels underneath that. And at the base of the pyramid, there is the societal condition. We have outdated and totally unsustainable models and ideas and structures. And this is something that is only started to be embraced in sort of recent years. Many years it was just been looking at the science and the ecology, but through pressure of a lot of groups, we're starting to see that we have to start making changes and question what models are based, our society is based upon. But ultimately, at the bottom, to me, and that's what's very much driving me, is that there's a crisis in our human condition. This is one of the biggest learnings I have taken away from living for 5 years with Indigenous people, is that they have a complete different understanding what the human journey is about. What it is to be human, what our role is, what our purpose is in this world, and what this life is, and what is life, and what is death, and what is beyond. And to take the latter, talking about death, death is still pretty much a taboo in our culture. It's something that we don't learn really about death, and we don't learn about dying. It's the end, basically. That's at least how I've been raised, and who I still see most people in society have a hard time dealing with that concept, where it's the only thing that we are sure of when we're born. And this is very much a very different way that Indigenous people look at the whole cycle of life and death. But when you have a complete different outlook on that, then everything changes. Everything that you look at it like, the perspective changes. So to me, the root cause of climate change is the human condition. And the great upside of that is that if we look at it like that, we can say that it is actually in our hands. The biggest problem we hear about climate change, and people starting to get tired and depressed about it, is we are basically powerless. And I like to contest that. So that's one big part of the way that I look at the world. And one of the shamans that we talked to and spent time with was Margaret Connolly in Ireland. And one of the quotes in the film is that she says, "We are part of everything. Is the wave, the sea, is the sea, the wave." And at the same time, if I know myself, then I know the world. And then when I heal myself, I heal the world. And she's saying in a different way, she's describing that bottom of the pyramid. That is us. That's each and one of us and each little community that we are part of. Another way of looking at it is you say that, the people that have real impact in the world are the people that actually are able to take these big global problems and manage to make them personal and make them individual. And, this is, whatever you think of Greta, this is a wonderful example of how that works. If you make something personal, you can have an incredible impact. But another way of looking at it, at the crisis that we're having, is that you say, well, we have been led this way. We have leaders, we have chosen leaders, we have created leaders that have led us on this path. And I like to say we don't just have a climate crisis and a societal crisis. We have a real leadership crisis in the world. The quality of leadership. I mean, I've been living for the last 12 years in the United Kingdom, and it becomes very obvious to people that we have a very small amount and a very limited pool to choose our leaders from. And that's not the only country in the world where that applies, but it becomes more and more obvious. And so, I think it's needless to say that we actually are in need of a reset of what leadership is and what it's seen as. And we go back to the terminology. The origin of the word leadership is, in Old English, is basically the skill to guide the way. But what have we made of it? And leading us where? That's the big question. And where did we get lost? And where did we start to lose that concept of leadership? And so today I want to answer that question. That's the first part of the evening or the afternoon here in the Americas. Then I want to talk about how we can reclaim that art of leadership that I was talking about before. And then in the second part, I want to talk about what is, to me, the body of the work that I'm trying to bring out in the world as my mission, is how I see that we have 7 paradigm shifts that we have to look at. And if we have the 7 virtues that I've learned about and that I've actually found as a treasure in my journey, then I think we have a way of reclaiming what we have lost. So how did we get lost? Well, very briefly, a little bit of an historic view. And this is just a personal view. And I say, there is a way of looking from a system perspective and from a human perspective. And if we look at a system perspective, I would say a lot went wrong in this period called the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was all about scale. It was about efficiency. It was about the hierarchy of capitalism that came into being right there. And I studied economics, and I sometimes look back and say, what did we actually get taught? These economic models, which I can see is one of the main problems of where we are heading with our society and we're heading in the world. I can talk about this for an hour, but I'm not going to. But there's something else that happens in the Industrial Revolution. It created something that it's called the manager. And actually that word manager goes back to, it was invented during the Industrial Revolution. And it was someone who was charged conducting a house of business or public institution who controls the resource and expenditures. Now, we recognize that. But that was something that we all of a sudden needed because of the scaling of these organizations. Now, what has happened over time? Organizations became bigger, and became multinationals. And continuous growth made larger hierarchies, and managers were put into leadership positions. but they were still managers. And that's where, is a big problem in the world today. Because what I'm seeing, and I've been coaching CEOs for the last 25 years, is that people are trained in our world to be a manager. That's what we learn in, that's how I was trained. That's how we, in our MBAs and business schools, we are taught managerial skills. And we're not really taught leadership skills. So when a manager has to get into a leadership position, I call it the super manager syndrome. And they have different roles, but they operate in a very similar conditioned mindset. And, I sit in the same box. And I like to go as far to say that for many of the super managers, that box becomes a cage. And that's what we see, in the world today, where, we sometimes ask ourselves, and especially when, like me, exposed to decision-making in boardrooms, and you see decisions being made from that straitjacket, that constraint of, just looking at the, the parameters and the performance indicators by which these people are held accountable. So what we have what we have seen happening is that we have become completely reliant on a pseudoscience that's called management, and we've lost the art of leadership. Now, I use a lot of corporate, terminology, but it's not different in the institutions. I work a lot in the educational environment, and you can see that there's sort of a 5-year delay of management models and ways of, going about running an organization that in the education system is copied, where we see just a copying of what's happening in the corporate world. Now, after the age before the age of the Industrial Revolution was the age of reason. And that gives us a human perspective of what I can see has gone wrong in the last 300 some years. Now, who was the leading philosopher of the age of reason, the Enlightenment? Yeah, there was René Descartes, and René Descartes and his and the philosophers of that time that became known as the enlightened philosophers. They put they were fighting against the power of the church and the power of the royals, and they came up with a lot of positive thought when it comes to about liberating man, but there was also something about putting man above nature. That's basically what happened in that same time frame. That if man was becoming the master of nature, then he would be set free. So there was basically, a barrier put there. Man, and you could actually say man was put above nature. There was a highly. This was the beginning of understanding that the individual has possibilities for individual development, which is great. And as I say, it's a pendulum that had to swing to the other side. But we can ask ourselves in hindsight if it didn't swing too far, because that's a start of the individual becoming maybe too important, and make the collective subjective to the individual. The main thing that the Descartes and the Age of Reason is known for is that is the rational, the mind. I think, therefore I am. The mind is leading, and if we rely on our mind, then that will create our path in life. But that's cutting off a big part of our ability to navigate through life. And so the intuitive was, the intuitive parts of ourselves were made, less important than the almighty mind. And last but not least, the pushback against the church It might have happened that, the again, the pendulum was swung so far back that the leading philosophers who at the time became the first atheists in their society, and with sort of pushing back to the church, we might have lost that spiritual understanding of who we are as a person. And so you could say that we were left in a small box, and this has evolved over the last 300 years, where we have created a society that keeps us in our box. And this is what I see still every day in my work, when I work with the people who have been, like I said, who have had all the opportunities to educate themselves, that I sometimes see, walking heads, people who just get their head from, one meeting into the next. And I just want to show a couple of things that our society is doing. And it already starts in a very young age. What do you want to be when you grow up? You have to do your best. And it's all about, in a very early age, we are being programmed for a society that is based on, you have to perform to become someone. Not that you're already someone. No, you have to become someone. And there's more mantras, but I'm not going to too much deep here, but I do a lot of this work in educational institutions where I make people aware of, what society actually puts out and, imprints on us when it comes to, the very first years of our life. Now, this is obviously, a huge issue in the world today. Social media, but in general, the overload of information, again, all going into the mind from the moment that we get up. It's the only fight that we really have in our household. My kids are now a lot older, actually the first one starting to leave the house. But from early morning till late at night, getting all that stuff in the mind, and you see that leads to a disconnected sense of being. Then there's the complete disconnect from nature. This is something I had to experience for myself. I thought I was pretty much a nature guy until the moment that I actually lived in nature and realized that I actually knew so little about nature, and I was not very observant. Go and walk with a indigenous person into the woods, and you feel like a baby. This is the reason why I work a lot in education these days. I think the future is really in revolutionizing our educational systems around the world. This is all part of this over focus on the cognitive side of our human being, and with that, I sometimes go as far to say that after 4 years old, we are basically destroyed from the bottom up, and it's just about from everything from the neck up is the only thing that is important. And I think there's a lot of good initiatives happening, so I'm not like completely pessimistic about it, but still there's a way to go to get us out of the box in that sense. Then there's a huge what I call societal imprint of separation. This is why, what can I say? It's a deep rooted problem that plays out in the world today, that became even a bigger problem during COVID. It's a big part of the source of the mental health crisis that we're going through at the moment. That people feel that they are to their own devices, that they are alone, that they are not part of a bigger picture, and that we have a very different way of living life than that I found in any of the indigenous communities where I lived, where it's really an imprint that is completely different. that you're not alone, that you're always connected, not just with your community, but you're always connected with your ancestors. There's a connection of 7 generations back and 7 generations forward. And to be part of that huge sort of community, in this world and beyond, makes that is a very different experience of living life in this world. And last but not least, I was trained as a marketeer, and trust me, I think that the way that the messaging from marketeers in the world is just doing that last little bit of tipping people over the edge, because marketeers know exactly where our soft spots are, and they know where our fears, our deeper underlying psychological fears are, and that's where they're pressing the buttons. And I'm not just talking about people selling insurances, which is very obvious, but the whole pharmaceutical industry, the whole sort of food industry, it is a continuous, unrelenting, stream of messaging that is just trying to make us insecure, because people who are fearful, people who are insecure, you can sell your stuff to. And that's a big part of our consumption society. Again, puts us back into our box. And this is one of the, well, let's say the main character of the film, and I just had to put him into the presentation with one of his quotes. And he said, the problem is there's no free thinking people anymore. We're all under the control of someone, and that's why we find ourselves in trouble. And so he's referring to that box, I think, here in his own way. So how can we reclaim that art of leadership? Because ultimately, the things I've just shared with you apply to all of us. But if in very simple terms, we understand that the ones that lead a community, the ones that lead a society, are the ones that actually have to role model and are sort of the examples for society. They basically show the virtues and the characteristics of what people reflect upon. So whatever happens to an individual in society, you can actually say is probably multiplied by somebody who finds himself in a leadership position. And so when we talk about leadership, I like to think of leadership as personal leadership. We all have something to lead in life. So how can we reclaim that? If this is a problem, then the solution is to break out of that box and make that connection, be in connection with nature, be in connection with our intuitive self, feeling part of a larger picture, and having that, that spiritual understanding of who we are. So breaking out of the box, reconnect, create with others and with nature, co-create. And I'm saying that, it's that full spectrum. We have to understand that, our mind and our rational self is just a very small part of the totality of who we are and who we can be. And it starts with deconditioning ourselves, of the way that we have, and actually have an understanding that we are conditioned. And this is the only place where we can find the true leader. It's not in a book, it's not in a model, but it's really to really understand ourselves and looking in that mirror and do that self-reflection. I believe that we all come in this world in a unique capacity with unique gifts and unique abilities. Some even say, with a certain, destiny, but definitely with a unique set of abilities and opportunities. And we're never going to be a true leader, in my opinion, if we don't start to work from those and start to embrace those. And in the many talks and encounters I've had with Nawatan, he started to see that I had a particular interest in leadership. And I never forget the day where he was just, you know, he was looking at me. He said, "Leadership, huh? You're interested in leadership?" And then he had long silence. He said, "There's a word coming." And I thought, oh my God, he's going to give me his understanding of leadership in one word. And imagine how, you know, how curious I was what he was going to say. And I was totally, you know, gobsmacked by the simplicity of the word he came up with. He said it's originality. And he had that pause between originality. And I got it. I got it from straight when he said it. It is to lead from our own origin. And if you look at true leaders, you know, you see the people that can really inspire you. They can inspire you because they are totally themselves. They have that real understanding of who they are in the world, who they are to be here, and what they have to bring, and that in a total authentic fashion. If you have seen the film Down to Earth, or if you're going to see the film, pay attention to what you feel when these people just speak to you on screen. Imagine how they're going to be in real life. And that is what all these people have in common. This is what all indigenous leaders have in common, because that's what they understand leadership is about. Leadership in the first place is about how you lead yourself, how you understand yourself. If you don't understand yourself, forget about having a position of any sort of leadership in an indigenous community. So working and leading from your own origin. Okay, well, Miriam, you had said I should have a break after 45 minutes, so I'll try to do these 7 paradigm shifts in the next 15 minutes. I'll go a bit quick through them, but this is something that's come to me in a vision that, you know, to change the way that we deal with leadership in the world, there are 7 things we have to shift. And I do this by looking at, you know, the way that we have portrayed the world, and the management model, the business model, is basically in this pyramid of strategy, planning, control cycle. That's how we manage a business. That's how we manage an institution. That's on paper, though. That's how we construct a business plan. That's how I was told. But in real life, I've come to see, and probably many of you, that that's just a small part of reality. You know, in that cycle of the tangible part of the business, you know, what is the strategy? What's the plan? How are we going to execute and you know, execute control? Is not the whole part of reality. There is something underneath the waterline and in this iceberg that has an incredible power, and it's going to decide whether that thing on top is going to float or not. Anybody idea what we call that part underneath the iceberg? Well, if we capture it in one word, it's called culture. You know, we all know the quote, huh? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. And it's true. I mean, this is what I work with in organizations. I work on the space underneath the waterline. But if we look at sort of the leader, so this is the organization, there's a similar thing. There's a universal human resources model that is based on what do you know, what are your skills, and how can you apply it? What is your performance attitude? You know, this is basically how we construct our CV, and this is what we look at. But when we hire people, we realize that a CV is just a small part of reality, and in real life we have a similar situation, and that iceberg turns up again. Now, what is that intangible, you know, the intentional part of the individual under the waterline? We can say that's the authentic self, you know, the character of a person. You know, what do I feel when I engage with this person? How does that person make me feel? That's not something we can put in the CV, but we do know if we ignore that part, looking at that part, we're going to make a wrong hire if we don't, if we're not careful. So that brings me to sort of my main picture of the model that I'm looking at, that has been in my, you know, in my conscious for a long time. And so when I look at developing leaders in developing organizations, I look at that stuff under the bottom line. I'm just going to just skip this. You could say that, to develop an organization, organizational development, you have to do the development of the leader, and it's all working on that stuff under the waterline. I don't pretend that I can, improve a lot of the skills above the waterline, because that's where they spend 90% of their time. That's where their whole education was about. But nobody, is ready to take on a job and knows everything about what happens underneath the waterline. We could say that's where the heart of the organization is. We could also say that's the heart, of the leader is. And here comes the interesting thing. When I started out in this world of, helping organizations to become healthy entities, there was a lot of people in the market who had cultural change programs, and they worked this way. The leadership had an idea of how they had to change the culture, and they introduced certain programs. Well, surprise, surprise, that didn't work. These cultural programs was the first thing that I took on in my first organization, to show that, the effect of these change programs that were model driven, had a very limited effect if it was not backed up by the right behavior of the leadership themselves. I worked for a big corporate and said, we have a trust issue. Well, I did a presentation to the board and I said, I realize where the problem resides. And I said, if you don't trust each other in this room, how are you going to expect that people are going to trust the rest of the organization to show their vulnerability if you can't even do it here in the boardroom? So this is the way that this works. Yes, there is a track above the waterline. It is important to to have certain capabilities and certain skills to make an organization run. That is a managerial part of a job. And we all have a part to fulfill if we run a classroom, an institution, or a business. But the real impact as a leader we make under the waterline, and that is the person that we are, what we bring to the party, what we as an authentic person, how we show up and how we role model the behavior that we want to see. If we're looking at this model, it brings to me forward the challenge that we are being taught and being told that we can make an impact from all the things that we do above the waterline. But what we see in practice is that the leaders that are really making an impact, the ones that can really change a culture from a dysfunctional or a not functional culture into a thriving one, are the ones that work under the waterline. That's where they make the difference. So in my quest about what these chunks are under the waterline, I was not satisfied by just saying, well, you got to be authentic and then you have a great culture. I've really trying to find what is the stuff that the organization is made up under the waterline. What actually makes a leader a leader? And this quest I describe in 7 paradigm shifts. There's 3 paradigm shifts in how we have to lead ourselves, 3 paradigm shifts in how we lead others, and that last one is about, why is it that we lead? And so I'll take you quickly through them. If we look at the iceberg of the leader, of an individual, of yourself, how do you lead yourself? The first shift is away from our performance attitude. We always have to perform. That is what we are being taught. That's what we're being awarded for, rewarded for. And the more we perform and the more we actually show that we can do stuff, we can manifest stuff, the higher we can grow on, in this case, a corporate ladder or, in any career, in any path. But then if you stay in that mode, you run into a wall. That's happening all the time. That's why I have a job as a coach for, senior leadership. People burn because that's not where they're going to make a difference. Where you're going to make a difference is in their way of being. That's where you make an impact as a leader, not by just continuously chasing the performance and wanting to be the one that is being seen as, the ones that literally perform. If you take the word performance and you think about it, it is playing a role. And if you want to address the culture in a company, if you want to inspire people, that's not the way that you're going to inspire people. You can only inspire people by being a person that can be felt, how do you make people feel, rather than what is it that you perform. When I talk about skills, managerial skills are basically your analytical, your thinking, decision-making skills. And again, when you move from above the waterline to below the waterline, I often say, it's no longer about being the smartest in the room. It's about who is the most aware in the room. And leaders that actually are trying to still be in their mind in meetings, in places where decisions are being made, they're missing the point, because it's really about trying to feel what is going on in the room. And that's where you're going to make the decisions. That's where you're going to be the proactive leader, rather than always being the reactive manager. So it's from thinking to feeling and starting to use your senses. The biggest impact I've made in working with corporate teams is when I started to bring body workers into the sessions, where people were brought in touch with their sensing ability, and with that, dropping the mask of the performer. And these things actually interact with each other. And then the third one, the enormous focus on knowledge is less and less becoming, crucial. And it's much more when you go into a position of leadership, of, a knowing what is right in the moment. Not having to go back and say, I'm going to think about it, analyze it, and look up some more data. No, there is something happening, and you have to work from your intuition, because I sometimes say leadership is knowing what is right in the moment. So working with that intuitive part of yourself is a crucial aspect of any leader. So if we sum that up, to get from the managerial mind to the leadership role, it is these three paradigm shifts: from performing and doing to being, from thinking to feeling, and from knowledge to knowing. Similarly, there's three paradigm shifts in the way that we lead others. And we've said it before, culture is eating strategy for breakfast, but what is culture? What is it made of? How do you create a culture with a community of people? Where does that start? Does that start with a strategy? Well, not really. It starts with something that is sometimes, exchanged in documents as, we have a strategy, we have a vision, but it's something very different to have a vision as opposed to a strategy. A strategy is something that, is something to get from A to B in a certain time frame. A vision is much more like a dream that is personal. A strategy is impersonal. That's the business what has to do something. But a leader can have a vision that, that fits in a strategy. It shouldn't conflict, but it should be something that is personal, that is something that inspires people, because it is coming from the heart. It's not coming from the mind. I can give you multiple examples, but because of the time I won't do it, but I'm sure you have very personal experiences with this, where either yourself had a vision as opposed to just a a strategic idea that bound more people to you and to make you follow, or you've been in a situation where you've had a leader where you realized because of this person and their personal passion for something, a dream that they were following. But it goes to organizations as well. I'll give you one example. NASA was very successful in the 60s and 70s, putting a man on the moon. With the state of technology as it was an incredible achievement. And then in the 80s and 90s, NASA, with increasing technology, amazing, more sophisticated technology, they had one failure after another. They had McKinsey coming in and say, what went wrong? And the short story is that when in the 60s in the 60s, you would come to NASA and you would come to the elevator and you would ask the bellboy, what are you doing here? He would say, I'm helping to put a man on the moon. In the 80s, when you come to the same bellboy and say, what are you doing here? So I'm pressing buttons. And it was literally that kind of a aha moment for NASA to say, we went on a strategic path, but we lost our vision. If you follow a vision, you can't follow a plan, because a vision is a dream that, create together. And so you can't go in a planning mode. We say, I know what's best for our organization and for you to do in a year ahead. Now, a vision is something you walk to together from step to step. And that means you can do that only by co-creating. Now, this is the big thing for leaders, how to get from a planning mode to something of letting go and letting things evolve. It's a very different skill involved. And the last thing you can do is control. You can't work on control base, because if you want to co-create, you want everybody to bring in the best part of themselves. And if you're in a control mode, people will shy away from that because it's not safe. So you have to have a safe place. And that means that you have to be a serving leader and not a controlling leader. That's what creating trust. So in short, these are the 3 paradigm shifts to go from a managerial mindset to a leadership mindset. And then just before the break, see Miriam is already looking at her watch. The 7th paradigm shift is maybe the most important. That's where it starts. If you follow Simon Sinek, you know that it's all about the why. It's the most important thing. And I do believe that's also applying to the question, why do you want to be a leader? And to be honest, if I look at the grand average of people that I work with and I have worked with in the last 25 years, I would say 9 out of 10 ambition is number 1. Where the ambition comes from is a different matter that comes from very different ways. But the ambition is there because if you really ask them why you want to get to that next step, there's always an answer that leads back to ambition. Well, in this new world that I'm trying to propagate, there has to be something else in that. And it won't be surprise you, because I know the audience a little bit, that, that has to be replaced with meaning. And an inspirational leader of the world today and tomorrow has to bring that meaning to his or her job. So instead of from striving status, it's striving for purpose. From an ego-driven to an ecosystem-driven mindset. And so this is the final picture that basically shows my modeling, as much as you can call it a model. It's a thinking model. It's not a model that you can follow step by step. But this is my conceptual thought about where we are in the world today and where we have to change from all that stuff above the waterline that is so ingrained in our nurturing of leaders to that intangible stuff that has a lot more to do with self-analysis, soul searching. I was coaching somebody this morning and said, can you take me on a vision quest? And it's like, you wouldn't expect that question 10 years ago. But people start to see more and more like, I have to really understand what I am doing here, what I am really about, what it is that I have to bring into the world if I really want to be that inspirational leader. And if we don't, you could say that this is the loss, this is the opportunity loss that we leave off the table if we only focus on whatever is tangible in the world. Okay, a break. And Miriam, you had asked me if I had a question for people for a breakout. And I would like to ask the following question. If you consider those 7 paradigm shifts and you apply them on your own world and your own reality, what is the paradigm shift that is most challenging for you? Or if you say it in a different way, what is the paradigm shift that you may be currently working on because that is something that you feel needs work?
Okay. Thank you so much. There is so much you said. There is so much you shared. There's a lot of content. I think even before we go to a break, it's good to have just a moment for us to think about so many concepts and ideas that you just shared. Paradigm shifts, leadership, heart and mind, intuition. So just inviting everyone to just take a moment about these ideas of leadership, shifting leadership from focus on thinking to feeling, knowledge to knowing. So many ideas you shared here, from an ego-driven to an eco-driven mindset of leadership. So before we go to a big break, I would like to actually just have a moment to touch base with you and others. May I invite maybe, I don't know if Irma or maybe Irma, would you have a comment or a question to Rolf?
Thank you, Miriam. Hi, Rolf. Good to see you. Thank you for sharing your, I was going to say knowledge, but that's not the right word, is it? Considering your presentation. So working with Indigenous people also is challenging if you are looking at cultural, being culturally appropriate. So how do you deal with, how much can you share, how much can you use without, let's say, stealing or without being disrespectful, having the right amount of respect for the knowledge that's been shared?
Yeah. Well, it's a very good question. I think it's important for everybody to do so. It's also just something that you can openly discuss when you are with these people, and then again, you find different responses. I have met even within the Native American communities, just focus on that. That's where I spend most of my time. There's people who will give you very different answers to that. I was lucky enough to work with people who are very open-minded and who say, they have had a vision that the problem of the Native Americans is that by being so overprotective of their heritage, they actually have a very limited impact on the world. And the vision that the teacher that I worked with was that he was told in this vision that the only way that the Native American heritage could have a meaning for the world and have an impact on the world is by sharing their heritage with the white man. And that's why they opened their doors to, to people like us. As a family, we were basically, totally included into their family, into their ceremonies, into their everything. And I did all these years, I did make the checks and say, you know, what can be shared about this? And the answer was always whatever you feel appropriate. Now, that was not always the answer I would get if I was working with other leaders. But there is a shift throughout the world of indigenous people who have very similar ideas, similar prophecies. You know, that it's not about just for them keeping their knowledge and their insights to themselves, but that actually, you know, the world can only gain if they start sharing it with the world. And this has to do with the simple fact that they start to see that a larger proportion of the so-called non-indigenous people is ready to receive this information. So I don't think it's a fixed answer that you know, can be given onto this question. It's a dynamic answer. It's changing. It's opening up. But at the same time, yes, you have to be respectful when it comes to, you know, certain ceremonies and certain, you know, bits and pieces of knowledge. And so you ask, you know, what you share with me, is that to be shared with the world? And that's a simple rule that I followed from the beginning of engaging with these people, and so far it's worked out fine.
Yeah. So it starts with connection and respect.
Always.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with that. Go ahead, Irma. Irma, you wanted to say something else?
No, that's no, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Dirk, you had a question.
Yeah, I had to put on my mic. Well, first of all, thank you for attaching words to many of my thoughts and struggles. I think from all the masterclasses, this one is for me maybe the most impactful. So thank you for that. My question is, can we be trusted with this kind of indigenous wisdom, or will we turn that into the next fashionable management book? In other words, do we have enough understanding to apply this kind of wisdom in the Western world?
Well, we're only halfway in the masterclass. I still have something left for you in a minute. Might answer a part of your question. But yeah, I can almost say fully yes. You know, I think, like I said, the development in the world is so fast. I have, since I come back, I have worked with these paradigm shifts, and what I'm going to tell you next with these 7 virtues that help manifest these paradigm shifts. And these 7 virtues, they go back thousands of years. They're the same virtues. They call it the 7 grandfather teachings. I don't know if you ever heard of it, but the 7 grandfather teachings goes back thousands of years, and they have been staying the same, and they're still the same principles of leadership, the same principles of having a good life. And why is that the same? Well, to them, it's like, duh, if you have principles for a good life that you teach your children, then the ones that actually have to be the role model have to excel in these virtues. And that's how simple it is. It's not a deep science. It's not a secret. These you can find online. You know, different tribes have different ways of sharing it, but it's the same virtues. And in the end of the day, and this goes back to the previous question as well, what I forgot to say is that I do believe that the thing that we can take from indigenous people is not something that we copy and paste. It is something that I have been inspired with after I came back after 5 years. I received a vision where these 7 paradigm shifts and these 7 virtues all of a sudden blended. And I was like, it was the most powerful experience I've had in my life. And I was overwhelmed by it. And yeah, I could have written a book about it. I mean, I am now after 12 years of using it in practice, but I realized, no, I have to test this in practice. It has to be something that I have integrated in myself and understand truly. So it becomes my understanding. It becomes my knowing. Not that it is mine, but it's something that I have integrated, and therefore I can do something with it in practice. Yeah. I have tried this out in in small companies, in big companies, in institutions. I've tried it out in schools. I've tried it out with young people, old people, different cultures in different countries. And everywhere I come, I starting to more and more get affirmation that this is universal knowledge. This is of universal interest. This is not just of a tribe or of a certain kind of people. And that's what I hope to do after the break, to show you that there's 7 words, 7 virtues, that there's no mystery about it, but it's how you can see it and how you can apply it. And that's my little contribution that I have been able to, to channel in a way that all these paradigm shifts that I've been thinking about before I moved there, all of a sudden, only after those 5 years when I came back, I started to see they fit perfectly. Those 7 virtues are basically, part of the solution that we seek. Sorry for the long answer, but it was
very valuable. Thank you, Rolf.
Okay, so shall we go for our breakout rooms? I'm going to be there for about 10 minutes. What was your question, Rolf, again? Just to
question
remind.
is, if you look at these paradigm shifts, look at yourself and see what do you find challenging? Which of these 7 you find most challenging? And maybe you can share that in the subgroup.
Yeah, great. So you have time also to get to know one another and to share your insights of what you just heard from Rolf. Thank you, and you can go to breakout rooms, and we'll come back shortly here and have a last session in the plenary. Thank you so much.
Sometimes there is a general knowledge, so and it won't work. So how do you counter? How do you convince others this? Because this is your intuition. It wouldn't work, and then the others say no, it will work. It will work. So you're torn. How to deal with this?
Thank you, Norman.
Yeah, that's a question to me now, Norman.
Yep.
Well, how many times have I been in this situation? And obviously it's never exactly the same. It depends on the level of and trust and collaboration that is in the group. But I have learned that when I have this inner question in me, the sort of the status quo, the knowledge here, and my intuition there, that I'm not ready to take a decision. I have to dive a little bit deeper to understand why there is this contradiction in what status quo and what I'm sensing. And this is something that we actually I did a session like this many years ago, where we actually brought one of my body workers into the room to show people how the body never lies. That was basically the title of our session. And we did like a half-day session, and we showed them that your intuitive self, your sensing self, is not manipulatable by your ego. Your mind is. Your mind screws with you. Sorry for my English, but your mind screws with you. Your body, what you sense, your body never lies. So if you have a bodily and sensory experience and input, you better listen to it. And it was a month after the session that I got a call from one of the participants, and I actually knew him very well. I worked for him at one day, and he was a CMO of a big bank institution. And he said, remember your session? And I said, yeah. I said, what do you remember about it? He said, well, not so much what I remember. I said, but what it led to. I said, tell me. And he said, I can't tell you yet with whom it was, but last week we were in the final talks about a merger with another bank. And it was the 2 boards of the company came together for a last part of the exchange and the last questions we had to one another. And he said, I was in the meeting and they showed all the slides, and it all looked great on paper, on the slides. He said, but I didn't feel okay. I started to feel really tired. And he said, I remember you saying, when there's no reason to feel tired, but your energy is drawn, you better pay attention. And he said, and I also remember that you said, you don't have to know what's going on, because that's the thing with intuition. It is a signal.
Mhm.
It's not the answer yet. He said, and I remember that you said, just share the signal, just share the sensation, just share what you feel. He said, so we had a coffee break, and I thought, this is the moment. So he said, I was just with my board members, and I shared. I said, guys, I don't know what's going on, but I shouldn't be tired. I had a good sleep. I'm well rested, but I feel my energy is going down the drain during this presentation. Am I the only one? And he said, long story short, I was not the only one. They all had sort of an uncomfortable feeling, but we couldn't put a finger on it. He said, we halted it. He said, what happened in the last week is unbelievable. I said, but we have pulled out of the deal. And he called me a month later. He said, there were so many skeletons in the cupboard. He said, I feel that that moment, my intervention has saved us from a huge, huge mistake. So this is the problem. We are in a room and we're sensing something. There is an ego game going on, or we have an idea that something is not said that should have been said. There's a game being played and we don't know what's going on. Or what I just said, there can be many, many reasons why what's being said is not the whole truth, is not the whole, the whole puzzle. You have that inkling. The most important thing is to speak out and start sharing. But by not saying, because you don't have the answer, you don't have the alternative solution ready, that's not the point. But that's where co-creation comes in. By just signaling it and putting it out and asking, and a good leader will facilitate that. They'll say, okay, how does everybody else feel? And then the pieces of the puzzle start to come together. And that's how you become a proactive team. That's how you become a successful group of people, because you use all the different parts of the input, all the different parts of reality, not just the ones that are the smartest thinkers, because they often overthink and outsmart themselves.
Yeah, thanks.
There was another group with,
yeah, and it's the only way to undo the ego games that are being played in groups, and they play everywhere.
There was another group with Leona and Linda. So Linda had also a comment here in the chat. I don't know if any one of you would like to open your mic and share any insights or what you shared or comment or question.
Yeah, thanks, Marianne, and thank you, Rolf, and everybody. I was speaking with Linda, and we had a little conversation. And when I was just very quickly taking notes, Rolf, you were talking too fast and I couldn't see some of the right-hand part of the screen. And I was trying to second guess what was underneath all of our faces, but intuiting. And I was looking at the 7 paradigms. And I was just very briefly saying to Linda as we were chatting, I'm one of the lucky ones, Rolf. I've stepped out of a lot of cultural, organizational energy over the last number of years. I'm a psychotherapist, and I've worked in mental health in large organizations, both here in Ireland and the UK and the States for a long time. And I got to a point where I could feel the energy was actually pulling me down as a being. So it left me with, for me to say to myself, okay, do I want to stay here? And I worked in management. And I tried and I tried and I tried doing a lot of the little things that we're kind of touching on now. And I think I got to a point where I started to really listen to my intuition. So I left organizational world and I went off on my own journey. And over the last number of years, I've been very privileged, I'm independent, I work for myself. But all my work is outdoors in nature. So I'm also a shaman, and I'm a forest school leader, and I'm an eco arts practitioner. So I bring everything now and blend it with not so much the knowledge, because I had a huge amount of destructuring of myself, the 30% that you talk about, Rolf. And intuitively, even as a child, knowing that 70% was so important, but like you say, what influences us, you know, through our lives. I went off on this tangent within that 30%, and I paid a very, very dear price for it. So I've kind of come full circle now, and I've come back into the 70%. And I just feel it's coming home. That's what it is for me. It's a homecoming. I'm really curious as well about the discussion around you know, working with Indigenous groups, Indigenous peoples, and obviously being Irish, we've got a little bit of stuff going on here in relation to decolonization. There's a lot of discussion happening here around all of that. So, you know, the powers that be who want to hold on to the old paradigm, the old way of doing things, that energy is very heavy. So I suppose part of my question, and the one that I chose of the 7 paradigms, was, you know, how do I know I want to be a leader? How do you even know that? And I think you're right, Rolf. I think it is about that 70%. It is intuitive. It's not a head thing. It's not a knowledge thing. It's not a skills thing. I think it's an integration thing, being able to know how to discern between the 30% and the 70%. And I've found myself having to, you know, be really mindful of when my ego wants to pull me back into that 30%, and just acknowledging that, and then just gently coming back into the 70% again. So it was number 7 for me, was that it still is the challenging one. Why I want to be a leader. Yeah.
I'm happy to try and answer that question to you. In the old world, it's simple. You know, I want to be a leader because I want to climb that ladder. You know, because I want to be seen. I want to be valued. I want to be respected. I want to, you know, whatever. But it has to do with a form of ambition. It has to do with that filling that ego. Very simple. And so that's what happens when we get stuck in our mind box. If you compare that to what happens in Indigenous communities, and this is in all Indigenous communities, but I tell you the story of Nawatan that you know, the main character in our film, He Who Listens. When he was seen as having the leadership's seed, as they call it, he was a boy. He was, I think he was 12. And sometimes it goes even earlier. But this is what happens in the communities. It is the grandmothers who watch the children in the village, in their play, in their playfulness, and they watch and they see who has the potential to be a future leader. Now, who do you think that they pick? What do you think they look for in a person? It is the opposite of what we are doing in the people that we pick. We pick the ones that first have to have a high IQ, else you won't be able to be pre-selected for certain educations to get into a certain university and whatever. Then, you know, we put them in a pool of high potentials and we see who comes out. You know, and in the whole process, I can make a long story, but the long story short, in that whole process, we build up ego. And then throughout the whole career path, the way we remunerate leaders, it is all ego building. And then they come to a point that, you know, they are so far apart from themselves, they have to hire somebody like me to start taking that apart, or somebody like you to take that apart, because they see this is not serving the community. Now, in an Indigenous environment, it's the total opposite. They're trying to find the youngsters who are the most sensitive ones. And as I've said to Miriam before in previous sessions, exactly the ones that even don't make it through our school system, because they are misunderstood, they are misguided, they often literally don't even make it, because they don't feel there's a place for them in this world. But the most sensitive ones, those are the ones that you don't have to teach about what it is to serve a community, because that is who they are. And that is not something that you can learn at a later day. Okay, now we're going to give you a training in servant leadership and we're all going to be servant leaders. It is bullshit. It's not how it works. You have to understand who you are and why you want to do it. And this comes to the why question. So when Nowatin was told when he was 12 years old that he was given a leader name, and he was going to be a leader in the future, don't think that he was like, yay, I'm gotta get the top job, because that's not the way it's perceived. Even at a young age, they know when you're seen as a leader, that means a lifelong in service. That's what it is. A lifelong in service for the community. So if you then have a why as a leader, it means that you have, that is the meaning, that is the purpose. You are not there for yourself. You're there for the community. Now, put that against the leaders in our world. I won't call any names, but it couldn't be further from the reality. I'm conscious of time, Miriam. I really don't want to leave here before I have revealed the 7 virtues, which to me is a treasure chest that I found, but I didn't see the treasure when I found it. Because during the 5 years that I lived in the woods with the natives, I heard about the 7 teachings so many times, and I saw them on signs, and I looked them up, and I found them a bit trivial. But that was because I didn't have the full understanding and the full feeling of what these words intended. Part of that has to do with language. You know, they look at our language, and that's why these indigenous people fight so hard for the existence of their language, which I also didn't understand at the beginning. I thought, you speak perfectly English. Why, are you so hung up to this language? But their language, and all these indigenous languages, are languages that are so much richer than our language. So these 7 words I'm going to share with you are in English, but understand that it's just one word that to them is a very small part of the reality of their original teaching, because every word comes with a story, comes with a totem animal, comes with a whole understanding of reality. But I'm going to share my screen because I want to bring it back to something that is not mythical or mystical. I want to bring it back to something that you can apply in your daily work. And to come back to the first question, this is for everybody. It is something that is in your own way easy to apply, but then again, when I say easy to apply, it doesn't mean that it's a one pony trick. It is something that you can keep working on for the rest of your life, basically. So the 7 grandfather teachings, there's a beautiful story you can find online how it was. It's part of the creation story. But these teachings are called the guiding principles to a good life, the teachings of human conduct, or the virtues of leadership. It's all of the same. And they, again, to me, it's just logic. If you have a society where these teachings are taught children from a very young age, not in our textbook teaching, but through stories. Every teaching has stories attached to it, has animals attached to it. And so over the years, throughout the young years, these 7 teachings are basically, becoming a living thing for all the, all the members of the community. And like I said, it's nothing but logical that if these are the founding, principles for a community, that a leader has to, be a role model in them. And I call them, a bit popular language, but it's about unleashing your superpowers under the waterline, because the interesting thing about these virtues is they are accessible for everyone. It's not beheld to somebody with a certain IQ or somebody who has gone to a certain institution, educational institutions. These virtues are innate virtues that we all have and that we can develop. And to me, what I got in that vision was all of a sudden the realization that these virtues are basically the way to make these shifts happen as a person. So the 3 virtues of teaching yourself. What is the virtue? And I'm going to ask the question, what is the virtue that we can I can't look at the chat whilst I'm doing this. What is the virtue that we need as a leader to go from that performing attitude to that just being in the moment, that authenticity? So from the doing to the being. It's called truthfulness. And truthfulness is not that you're always telling the truth and never a lie, or truthfulness is how true are you to your spirit? And that's basically the question was asked before. How can I apply my leadership when I was Zoe, I think, when faced with the status quo that is threatening? Well, what is more threatening to give in to something that you don't believe in, or to give in to something that is not you? And I would say this is part of the courage that we have to have as leaders, to actually stand for who we are and to speak our truth. To go from thinking to feeling. This is a funny one if you see the word in English, but it's the best word they could come up with. And it's honesty. And again, it's nothing to do with whether you are always honest in the moment, but it's, are you honest to what you feel? Are you honest to what you sense? Are you honest to your inner being? And that's what I said before, that has everything to do with awareness. We often feel something, but we don't give it the attention. How often have you had a situation where you, in hindsight, realize you have taken exactly the wrong decision? You've gone for the wrong partnership. You've gone for the wrong person to deal with. And that you go back in time and you say, well, actually, at the moment that I had to make a decision, I felt this, but I didn't give it credit. I didn't give it attention. And that's what I mean. It's also what I mean when we're talking to be of service to others. It's about how real are you? Can you really be real to your dear ones or the people that you work with in your community? Not by saying them what you think, because basically in my coaching of teams and leaders, I said, I'm not interested in what you think. I'm interested in what you feel, because that to me is real. That to me is something that is not coming from the ego. That is just a real observation of your senses. That's your awareness speaking. And that's how we can solve problems. That's how we can go beyond the gameplay. And that's what I mean with honesty. It's honesty in the way that you can be honest to what you feel. What is the virtue? And you all know this one. How we get from knowledge to knowing. What is that called? It's in the title of the presentation. That really is wisdom. Wisdom is knowing something without being able to necessarily explain it. And, where does wisdom come from? And then often I get people to say, it comes from experience. And I said, well, yeah, might do, but it's not a necessity. It's not necessary that the people with the most experience have the most wisdom. They sometimes can be the most static and most inflexible and people to work with, because they have done something always in the same way. And at the same time, I know a lot of very young people who are very, very wise, and they have no experience in a particular field that they can say something about. So it's not necessarily linked to experience or to age. What it is linked to is that they have found a way to listen to something, a voice that sits in here, not a voice that sits in here. And that's a voice that can play games with us. This is a voice that can be fed from even another dimension. And this is, where we go a little bit further, where, maybe some in the audience can go along and some others sometimes can't. But having lived for 5 years with indigenous peoples, they all, and you see it in the film as well, they all rely on that connection with their ancestors. They all rely on a connection with spirit. And they get fed information. And it's like, there is a way to access a unknown field of knowing if you manage to open yourself to it. And that's the simplest way I can explain it. But it's not something that you're ever going to learn out of a book. You're only going to learn it by trying to open up as much as you can to a possibility that there's other ways of obtaining a knowing than through our Western way of obtaining knowledge. And that's one of the most powerful and beautiful things that I have experienced, and that I have seen people experiencing in starting to opening up, because it is all about opening up. It's opening up to possibilities, opening up to letting your guard down, being vulnerable, being, being an open vessel for information that can come in. And I truly believe that this is not just for the few. It is ultimately something that everybody has access to. Now, some have a higher sensitivity than others. Some have a better environment where they are taught this way. But it is something that is an innate gift that we have. Then the 3 virtues to, to lead others. Again, this comes back to this question from Zoe earlier. What do we do if we, we are in a situation where we know there is a better way, we have this vision, we have an idea about what the future looks like, but we are being confronted with the status quo, who said, no, this is the way that we do things, and this is the way that we plan things. Because this is the interesting thing. I hadn't said that before, I realized. A strategy, if you think about it, in a world that is so changing so rapidly, how can you be so pretentious to say that you know what is going to happen in the next year and what the best plan of action is? Because, in most cases, strategy is set out for a few years or at least a year. How can you make a plan for and a strategy for the next year or years with the enormous amount of changes going on in the world? That is almost like a recipe for disaster. So this has always been a thing. I think there's always been important for vision, but it's speeding up in the world. So we need people who have, that capacity to dream and see a future, a possibility that is not real yet, but that they can visualize. That's why it's called a vision. Now, if you, Zoe, you find yourself in that position, you need a virtue, and that's this virtue. If you're struggling to bring your dream across in your community because they're stuck to a certain strategy or a plan, this is what you need. And it's as simple as that. And, you might not get the ear, you might not get your vision across, but to me, I even had it last week in a session with somebody else coaching. I said, well, it's up to you. But if this is what you believe in, courage is the best way as to have a self-selecting mechanism. If you show the courage for something that you truly believe in, with every aspect of your being, and you're not going to stand for it, then that's a loss already. If you stand for it and it's not accepted, you can say it's a loss if people throw you out, or in worst case they fire you. But you can also say this may be the best thing that can happen in that case. That's what I call a self-selecting mechanism. Why would you waste your time spending with a group of people if something that you dream about is not being considered in the least in the least way? So yeah, courage is something that is, I would say, undervalued and underrepresented in the leadership today, because leaders are very risk averse, because that's how we're being taught to make careers. How do we go from planning to co-creating? I said before, this is one of the hardest ones. Even for people who understand that, you know, and have a vision, how do you implement the vision? You have to basically unlearn. You have to unlearn the idea of that everything is going to work according to a plan, because that's how we have been programmed. This is where I started this evening with. And so what is the virtue that we need to go to co-creating? And this might surprise you. The word has been used before. But the reason why I believe that respect is the essence, the essential virtue to make this happen, is that in a planning situation, I know what's better for the future and what's better for you than you would by yourself. That's the position. In a co-creation position, we all meet at the same level. And this is ultimately going very deep into sort of indigenous spirit. They have this respect that nobody is more than somebody else as a human being, and not even as, you know, a being. You know, we have animal life and we have human life. We have plant life, we have human life. And we all on the same level. Nobody is above somebody else. We have different roles and we have different parts to play. But that level of respect is a necessity to come to co-creation. Why? Because with that level of respect, we know that everybody in the group has something to contribute to the solution, to the pathway to the vision. And that's why I like the example of the bellboy that McKinsey even used. They say even the bellboy was part of the solution. And yeah, it's a powerful understanding when you really come to see it like that. And that's why I say co-creating goes beyond the team, goes beyond the organization. We co-create with the ecosystem. We co-create with nature. That's why the indigenous people have such a problem with conservation, because that has nothing to do with their understanding of nature. Why would you turn nature into a park where people can go in the weekend to just observe nature? No, it's a living relationship where we co-create. Now, this one you all know. Picture it. Somebody who is in a control mindset, I have to control what's happening, to somebody say, I'm serving. I once drew it for a guy who was in a total control mode. He said, can you tell me what you learned from these indigenous people? He had seen the film, but I didn't think he understood half of it. And I said, can you tell me what your position is in the company? And he drew it on a piece of paper and he drew his sort of org chart. And I said, do you want to know what, how indigenous leaders look at that? And he had his org chart on a piece of paper. And I said, they look at it this way. So instead of being on top and controlling the troops, you're here and you're holding the space for people to thrive. That is the difference. And that requires what virtue? Humility. And interestingly, I was reading a book today. Maybe you've seen it. I mean, there's different books written about the All Blacks. The All Blacks is what they say, the most successful sports team in the history of professional sport. It's the rugby team of New Zealand, who I think 2 decades ago were in a real bad shape, and they came together and they realized that something was wrong with the attitude and the culture, and they did an identification exercise, and they started to implement Maori principles into their teams. And it was all about having a vision that, we all still add to that heritage that is there, but we only add, we can't take anything away. And a big part of this book goes about humility, where these top athletes, they're world champions, but after the meeting, they pick up the broom and clean their dressing room totally that nobody else has to clean. And the idea is that, you know, if you don't have that humility, if you feel that somebody else has to clean behind you, you never can show that leadership on the field. And that humility is one of their key aspects of having not just one leader in the field, but a field full of leaders. And I thought it was interesting to read. And you know, I can't say anything else that of all the leaders I've met that you will see in the film, that you can feel the humility of all of them. They never feel more than anything else. And they have that capacity to feel being in service for their entire life, basically. And these you're all going to know. It's called The Longest Road. The longest road from here to there. From ambition to meaning, from ego to eco. What is that called? It's a 4-letter word. And it might be not just the last one, but it might be in the end the most important one. A really short story that I experienced when I was in Nepal. I met a business guy there when we were trekking through Nepal and meeting the shamans. And he said, you know, I just want to learn everything there's to learn about leadership from this culture here. And so we talked about the person I'd met and said, can I meet that person? So he went there. And I was wondering how that was going to go, because I was a person of not many words. And so I met him a few days later. And I said, how was that? Yeah, he said, it was odd. He said, because, you know, I came there and I said, you know, he asked me, why are you here? And I told him, you know, I want to learn everything there's to learn about leadership from you. That's why I'm here. And he told me that he couldn't do anything for me unless I would bring one of my followers with me. And I said, I don't know what to do. My wife said, maybe I should go back and take my child. I said, what do you think? I said, well, might be a good idea. And so he went and he took his child there. And of course, we met up afterwards. And I said, so how did it go? Well, he said, it's a very deep one. He said it was very short, but it's something that I certainly have to chew on for a while. And so basically, the shaman had asked him, I said, you know, so you've brought somebody who follows you. So why do you think this person follows you? And he said, well, yeah, that's easy. He said, well, why is that easy? He said, well, because he knows that, you know, I love him no matter what. Aha, he said, then you know everything there is to know about leadership. And I would like to finish with that anecdote. Ultimately, you know, this is a power that goes beyond everything, as we know. But it's not just, you know, sweet love, it's also tough love. It's really, you know, wanting the best for the ecosystem, for the community. And that means that sometimes you have to be tough because you love so much for what you stand. I think we're going to leave it there, Marianne.
Thank you so much, Rolf. We'll stay with these beautiful words and knowledge and wisdom you shared with us to inspire us on the path towards leadership and contributing to the society and to the world, to the communities we are part of. Honesty, courage, respect, humility, love, among others. So with this, I think I should close. I'm sorry. It's more because of time. Expressing my gratitude to you, Rolf, for joining us, for sharing with us, again, inviting and engaging or encouraging everybody to watch Down to Earth film and to share with others, I would say. And thank you, everybody who has joined us today for this masterclass. It's with appreciation and gratitude, not only for this masterclass, but also for the year. It has been quite a journey of sharing this, creating these spaces of sharing and learning from different thought leaders such as you.
Thank you, Rolf. Nice to meet you. Thank you so much for the conference. I very feel grateful to listen to you about the importance of leadership. Now I have more opportunity to put these ethics in the leadership of my organization. Thank you so much. And my best regards, a hug is from Panama.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you to you, Marianne, for the things you're doing and the incredible work you're doing to bring this to bring this out in the world. I want to say to everyone that if you somebody asked me the other day, said, well, what is it that your role is? And I said, well, I'm actually basically it was in Dutch, so I said I'm an oproepkracht in Dutch. I can't translate it, but like I'm on call. So basically, I have laid down all my roles that are attachment to organizations. I've really built that off in the last years, because I realized that I want to be flexible. That when there's a calling to do something, that I can say yes to it in the moment, and that means that I want you to know that if you have a certain course where for example, you have a group of young people like you had in your environment. I love to be able to say yes in the moment to where I need to be and to contribute. So that's something I've learned also from these people, that they always make sure that they, even though they serve a whole community, they're always accessible. So I wanted to let you know that I like to follow that same pathway.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Rolf. I fully understand and see that we need to nurture a new kind of leadership in the world. And I see the role of the Earthshot International in our education center here in creating more spaces as we can to nurture that kind of new paradigm of leadership, as you were saying. And so thank you also for strengthening so much, I think, the importance of vision. I think for me, I stick with that importance of having a vision and sometimes not to stick on plans and controls. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rolf, for joining us today for this wonderful masterclass.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.